So the economic crash happened in 2008. The banks were taking wild risks with derivatives. They had too much leverage, and when their bets went wrong, particularly on the housing market, they didn't have enough money to cover those bets, so they all collapsed. And of course, the American taxpayer had to bail them out. Well, the Obama administration came in and did fairly weak regulations, dodd-frank. But at least it had some positive parts about keeping leverage in check, not nearly to the degree that I think is prudent. And I think it's already teetering on the edge as we speak. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. A lot of top economists and businessmen are worried, and they're giving warnings about be careful about the markets because, again, the banks are over leveraged. So what does Congress decide to do? Oh, I got a great idea. Why don't we let the banks run wild again? Now, they say there's no bipartisanship in Congress, but I tell you that that's not true. I tell you all the time. And we have bipartisan deals all the time. And we have another one. As long as somebody's paying for them, and in this case, the banks have stepped up to the plate and they have bought a sufficient number of Republicans. In fact, all of them. John McCain was absent from the vote, but every other Republican voted for it. And 16 Democrats easily pass a bill to deregulate the banks and let them take more risks. Oh boy. So let's go to the Los Angeles Times here to explain. Nearly 8 years after Congress dramatically toughened banking regulations after the financial crisis, the Senate took a rare bipartisan step and voted Wednesday to ease some rules on small and mid-sized banks. But larger banks also got some breaks in the legislation. Now that's very important. I'll explain those breaks for you in a second. That's probably what's going to crash the economy again. But it does drive me crazy whenever they say there's rare bipartisanship. And understand how this shell game is played. When the donors agree, you will have bipartisanship. It will almost never be in favor of the American citizens. It will be in favor of whatever the private interests that finance those elections are. We allow private financing, so of course they always agree that those financiers should get whatever they want, including banking deregulation in this case. The reason we have gridlock on all the other issues is because the donors don't want any action on those issues. So for example, the gun manufacturers don't want you to pass any legislation about guns. Right now it's the wild, wild west. They sell more guns, so you get gridlock. But that gridlock is also bought by the donors. So there's terrific consistency here, and unfortunately a lot of the reporters miss it completely, but that's okay. We're here to give context and analysis. So let's talk about the Democrats now. A group of moderate Democrats, several of whom face re-election this fall in states handily won by President Trump, joined with Republicans in voting 67-31 to enact the first major rollback of the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial overhaul law. Now, also drives me crazy when they call them moderate Democrats. And I'm not trying to beat up on the LA Times here. They had a good story, I'm quoting them. Almost every major print organization and certainly everybody on TV does the same exact thing. They call these Democrats moderates. But it's not a moderate position to be in favor of banking deregulation. Now, if you showed me a poll from red states, Kansas, Montana, South Carolina, Alabama, that said, oh, Republican voters and independent voters love big banks, or they even love mid-sized banks, and they think, my God, will you just take the shackles off of the poor bankers? You show me that poll and I'll call them a moderate. They're not moderate. I know the polls. I've seen them. I just reported on a poll from Kansas 3rd District. 77% say you have to get tougher on the banks, regulate them more, not less. The moderate position would be to regulate the banks, not to deregulate them. But whenever they agree with the Republicans, Democrats get to be called moderates. No, they're being right-wingers, they're being corrupt, but they are not being centrist, because Republican voters don't like it any better than Democratic voters. That's why Eric Cantor lost his seat in an unprecedented loss in the primaries when he was the House Majority Leader. He lost to Dave Brandt, who ran against the big banks. So please call them what they actually are, because they're nowhere near moderate or centrist. Okay, Mike Crapo is the senator who sponsored this. He's a Republican. And He was, of course, celebrating this so-called bipartisanship. He said, at a time of intense political polarization, we have proven we can work together to get things done. He's the Senate Banking Committee chairman. Well, let me show you how they work together to get things done. Let me show you a list of the Democrats who voted for this bill and the amount of money that they have gotten from the financial industry. As you look at this graphic, oh yeah, there you go. Hey, Senator Bennett, you want $3.9 million from the financial sector from 2013 to 2018? Ooh, all of a sudden, voting with the Republicans. Gee, I wonder why, I can't quite tell. Look all the way down that list and all you have is Democrats getting massive amounts of money, usually millions of dollars. Warner in Virginia getting $3.5 million. Tester in Montana, why are banks giving $1.8 million to a senator from Montana? And the list goes on and on and on. So you wanna get bipartisanship, you should buy the partisanship and you'll get exactly what you paid for, and those Democrats do as they are ordered by their donors. Understand that it is nothing but corruption. Anyone who tells you that it's for political reasons has never checked a poll and doesn't know anything about politics. That position does not test well in Montana at all. If you say it's about policy, that they have legitimate policy disagreements, really? 93% of Americans believe that the politicians serve their donors and not their voters. When you get nearly $4 million from a bank or from anyone, are you likely to do what they tell you? Yes, the rest of the planet realizes that, apparently except every political reporter in the country. All right. Now, what is President Trump's position on this? Because I know he ran against the globalists and the financial elites. Laugh along with me. President Trump commended the Senate on the bill's passage and would sign it into law, the White House said. What happened? I thought you were against the bankers and the globalists and the financial elites. It turns out you were lying all along. Now, of course, Trump voting with the financial elites, voting with the banks, and all that populist rhetoric he had in the campaign, total, utter nonsense, never meant one word of it. And now to the Democrats who voted with him. What happened to the resistance? I thought you guys were all about, oh my God, we're gonna resist Donald Trump. We're gonna get out in the streets and grab a microphone and a podium and, oh yeah, resist. How much money did the banks give me? Millions of dollars? We'll resist them on Friday, but not today. Thursday is not resistance day. Thursday is give the bankers whatever the hell they want day because they paid us and Donald Trump. Funny how that works. Proof's in the pudding, it's right here. All right, so what does this disastrous bill do? The legislation would remove Dodd-Frank's mandatory stricter oversight for about 24 larger banks, those with assets of as much as $250 billion. The bill would give the Federal Reserve regulators more flexibility in how they oversee large banks. Now, less flexibility means you must regulate them. You have certain rules that they must abide by. More flexibility means that, don't worry about it. The Federal Reserve under Donald Trump, I'm sure they're gonna get really tough on the banks. As long as it's voluntary, okay. The bill would weaken regulators' ability to enforce fair lending requirements by exempting 85% of banks and credit unions from dodd-frank data reporting requirements designed to help identify discriminatory practices. Great, let's go back to discriminatory practices, and later when we crash the economy, we'll blame it on the poor and minorities again. Okay, classy move. Now, it keeps getting worse. Part of the legislation could allow JP Morgan Chase and Citibank, two of the very biggest banks in the US, to hold less capital relative to their assets, undercutting one of the 2010 Dodd-Frank's law's safety measures. That's reported by HuffPost. That right there is the most important part. If you allow for greater leverage, they will leverage up to the maximum eventually. The reason is when you leverage more, you make more money. So you get all the upsides and you put it in your pocket and you go home. You take your bonuses, you get your mansions, your yachts, all that stuff, right? And then if your leverage doesn't work out and it crashes, you go back to the American taxpayer, man, there was nothing we could do. This just kind of happened. I mean, look, there's cycles in business. Who could understand it? I'm sure that Trump and Kudlow will figure it out. So they're gonna tell you that there was nothing they could do. No, this is it. They could have actually made sure that they limited leverage. Instead, they chose not to. And so they will make more money in the short run and they will definitely crash. I would say in the long run, but it ain't gonna take that long. The Congressional Budget Office, this is a little icing on the cake here, estimated that the bill would add $671 million to the federal budget deficit over the next decade. Funny, it's how these so-called moderates and centrists when progressives like Bernie Sanders say, hey, how about college for all or Medicare for all, where we actually deliver for Americans, make sure that they don't die if they have a pre-existing condition or if their kids have a shot at equality of opportunity by going to college. No, that's not practical. That'll add to the deficit. It'll add to the deficit. We can't have it. American people don't want that. But the American people want you to add to the deficit to help the big banks. That's what the American people are screaming for. In Indiana, in North Dakota, and Montana, where these corporate Democrats are from. They're like, oh, please help the big banks, please. It does. I don't care about the deficit, as long as it's going to the banks. How do you report this stuff with a straight face? Okay. And then, speaking of a straight face, I love this. We're back to my old friend Barney Frank. Dodd-Frank is named after Senator Dodd and Congressman Frank. We've interviewed Barney Frank before on the show, and he said, what do you want us to do? Take none of the banker money instead of 20%? Yes, that way you wouldn't be corrupt. Instead, you're a perpetual loser where you get 20% of the banker money, the Republicans get 80%, and that's how they keep on winning. What a preposterous system. Anyway, Barney Frank follows up with this preposterous quote. He says, don't worry, once this bill becomes law, that's the end of it. Oh yeah, I'm sure the Republicans will say, oh, you know what? You helped our banker friends. But that's all. We don't want to be greedy or anything. We'll just end it at that. And the bankers, they would never be greedy and ask for more. Oh wait, here's Senator Patrick Toomey, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania. Quote, much more needs to be done. What happened, Barney Frank? I thought you had this thing figured out. I think that you said that that's the end of it. The minute that it's passed, the Republicans are like, more deregulation, more profits in the short run, privatize the profits, socialize the costs. So these guys, it's a shell game. These Democrats are paid to lose. Why? Because why did the bankers give 20% to the Democrats? So they go, good boy, you vote with me, you make sure I get everything I want, and then you go, oh, there was nothing we could do. Oh, we had to vote with the Republicans. Oh, what could we do? I guess we lost on this one again. Paid to lose by the donors. All right, so let me show you those losers that take money from their donors so they could vote with the Republicans and Donald Trump to help the big banks and the mid-sized banks. Tom Carper, Christopher Coons, Joe Donnelly, Joe Manchin, of course, Bill Nelson, Gary Peters, John Tester, Mark Warner, a who's who list of corrupt Democrats who always vote with the donors. All right, let me give you more. Doug Jones, I like this part of the list. Tim Kaine, Maggie Hassan, Heidi Heitkamp, Claire McCaskill, Jean Shaheen, Debbie Stabenow, Michael Bennett. Wait, Tim Kaine? I was told by Hillary Clinton that Tim Kaine was a champion of the people, that he was going to fight for progressives. Tim Kaine. Well, I do know a guy who would fight for progressives. Luckily, earlier today, we interviewed him. Anna Kasparian interviewed Bernie Sanders, who was very much against this bill. He and a number of progressive senators led by Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown fought back against this bill, but as usual, the majority of the Democrats lost, as they are supposed to. But the progressives actually did fight, and it was a spirited fight. And Bernie Sanders was among those. So let's listen to him.
I do believe that one of the reasons why so many Democrats turned their backs on Hillary Clinton during the past general election was because they felt that she was too friendly to these big banks. And I think it's fascinating that some of our Democratic senators are not learning anything from what happened.
I could not agree with you more. Let us not forget, not for a second, and I'm afraid many of my colleagues did, what that 2008 crash did to millions of workers who lost their jobs, people who lost their homes, people who lost their life savings. And then we ended up bailing out these guys, and none of them on top were prosecuted for illegal behavior, despite paying billions of dollars in fines for illegal behavior. So I agree with you, and I worry very much about any Democrat who continues to be sympathetic to Wall Street.
But now, look, of course, I agree with Bernie Sanders' policy point of view there. He's clearly correct, and factually speaking, that's exactly what happened during the recession, et cetera. But it's not about the Democrats not learning their lesson, whether it's in terms of policy, the deregulation leading to crashes, or politics leading to losses when you support your donors. They're paid not to learn those lessons. You see, they have a different motivation than us. We keep assuming, why won't these Democrats do the progressive thing? Because you didn't pay them to do the progressive thing. The banks paid them for deregulation, and they got exactly what they bargained for. The first time they gave to Mark Warner, as an example, it was a little bit of a risk, not much of one. You know where Mark Warner stands. He's going to support the donors. It was a little bit of a risk. Hey, Mark, here, take some money from the banks and do as you're told. The second time they give to Mark Warner or Tim Kaine or any of the other people on this list, that's a return on investment. Hey, we gave to Senator Warner and Senator Kaine, and they were good little boys, and they did exactly as they were told. JP Morgan is not running a charity. They're not giving to politicians out of the goodness of their heart. They must get a return on investment. And for these corrupt Democrats, they got exactly what they bargained for. The banks got what they wanted, the corruption that they paid for, and the Democrats got what they wanted, millions of dollars in campaign contributions. You must go vote in primaries. You must vote in primaries. If you think these Democrats are going to represent you, you're out of your mind. These 16 Democrats, the corporate Democrats, the establishment Democrats, will always represent the people who write the checks. They will represent their donors because that is what they're paid to do. tytnetwork.com/register. It's just an easy URL. It'll be in the description box below. It takes you to a government website that shows you where to vote, how to register, how to get a mail-in ballot. Please go to that URL. You'll find your state, and you must vote in primaries and vote these bums out. Otherwise, you'll never be represented. If you become a member of the Young Turks, you'll be saying,
you know, I'm like a smart person.
So do it right now. tytnetwork.com/join. Get the whole Young Turks show every day.